Hi,
Hi.
how are you, Gitte?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
How do I pronounce your name? I keep forgetting.
Gitte.
Gide.
Yeah,
Gide. Thank you.
but it's okay. I respond to many different variations.
I understand.
But just to follow up on what you were saying, like about this happens a lot. 2 years ago, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, at Agile Testing Days, I had a really good example of that. So my friend Morgan and I was sitting at the party, and I asked him if he wanted to dance. And first he said no. And then he said yes. And then in his talk, he actually said that it was because he realized that I did not ask him if he wanted to dance. I told him that I would like to dance with him.
Mm.
And for him, he did not want to dance, but he would like to make me happy, so he danced with me.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very common thing, is we try to kind of interpret, and we're not very good at that. And I think especially in IT, because that's not what we're trained for. I mean, most of us are trained in calculating things or coding things, or thinking in black and white.
Mm.
Um, so we are not used to this, and I mean, a lot of us don't even know how to figure out what we want. So I think that's really hard. But I think it's something that's essential that we start. And I think what you said about connections, when you talk with Denise, I think that's so important.
How do you define connection yourself?
Well, for me, it's about starting to have a relation. When we have a team, for instance, for it to be a team, I think we need relations. We need to be able to relate to each other.
Mm.
um, I often do small exercises with teams, where they talk about small things, and it can even be like, I was in a training recently where we talked about what's your favorite snack.
Mm.
Then all of a sudden you go like, oh, you and I both like cheese doodles. Nobody else does. We have something in common.
Mm.
And even that small thing means now we have a connection that's not just we work together.
Mm.
Um, and I think if you have a team that's worked together for a long time, you can dive further in and start talking about things. But to create that kind of initial safety, so that we can even start talking about being vulnerable, um, I
Oh,
think we need to start slowly and build those small connections.
what I understand from what you said is, correct me if I'm wrong in what I understand. What I understand is, for you, connection is built with the links we share, with the experiences we share together. And to do so, what you try to do is to create artificial situations where I put on purpose little exchanges to know each other more from things that are not work itself. And by creating those links, getting little by little to the point where we can talk about, okay, I want to be vulnerable with you.
Yeah.
And when that conversation, I want to be vulnerable with you, happens, then that makes me think a lot about the Little Prince, right?
Yes.
You are
Yeah.
responsible for, I don't know what in English version what it is. We're responsible for the one you captivate. No, it's not captivate in English. Something else.
I've only read it in Danish, actually.
Yeah.
No, but I think it's about this, and I think often I think the beginning of vulnerability, those of us who feel comfortable, I think we can be role models and show vulnerability. Um, and like, I have privilege because I'm white
Mm.
and I am straight. And, I have a lot of privileges. I'm from a part of the world where we have healthcare and education and stuff. So I have a lot of privileges, but it also means that it is not as dangerous for me to be vulnerable as it might be for somebody else.
Mm.
And I can use that to show my vulnerability, but also to use my position
Of course.
to help others. I saw this really good TED talk with this woman who talked about or something about why we need more women to rule the world, or something like that. And
Mm.
what she talked about was that the traditional way of being a leader is you protect your turf because you're the only one who's there.
Mm.
Whereas if we could get to the more feminine values, not necessarily women, it's about sharing your turf.
So as I understand from you, is that, correct me if I understand you wrong, but what I understand from you is beyond artificially creating those situations where we can talk about vulnerability, there is also the using your privilege to actually pay the vulnerability price to increase vulnerability in the team itself.
Yes.
And as a person that has more privilege, if I use it more, my vulnerability creates an affordance of vulnerability. It creates many examples where it happened in the team, so other people can follow that example and not be the first one to do that. And as I understand you, you also put in place the idea of diversifying leaderships would also increase the chances that we have different ways of doing this, and hence increase the chances that people actually increase vulnerability. Is that so? Did I understand you?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And I think diversity is essential.
So, sorry, finish your
sorry. I was just saying, I think diversity is essential for us. And I think if we can kind of, make way for this, and other things we can do as a privileged person is to invite somebody, if we're in a meeting,
sponsor,
and you can say, oh, what is your opinion on this?
Sponsor, yes.
Yeah.
Given you the transactional privilege, yes.
Yeah.
I do think I have two questions with this. I do struggle with two things when you say me this. One is I have this impression, this is a story in my head, and I'm not saying it's right, it's just the things that pop up, right? One is I tried, I had one bad experience. I'm not saying that it is like that for everybody, but I had one bad experience of trying a lot, Clyde, during 3 years, I tried a lot to increase affordance. So I was doing things that not everybody thought people could not do. I was doing them on purpose, publicly, in order to increase affordance. And I was doing that a lot, right? And what happened in that specific case is that instead of creating a movement, instead of creating more people doing it, it created an acceptance that, okay, we cannot do this, but Romeu can.
Yeah.
Right? It created it just increased my privilege, right? Increased exercised and increased my privilege in the company, but it actually did not, in my experience, increase the affordance, right? So I don't know if you ever had that kind of difficulty, but I'm very interested in, if you had, what is the kind of thing that you put in place in order to avoid that situation?
I think one thing I have found out that I need to be aware of is that sometimes when I am with other agile coaches that are very junior, they don't necessarily feel safe enough to speak up when I'm in the room with others. And I found out because I was coaching a junior agile coach, and they said, in here, I feel at level with you, but the confidence that you speak with when you are in a big setting, that makes me doubt myself. Yeah. And I know that, I used to not believe in myself at all. I know now I take up space. So I try to be aware of this. And in this specific case, we discussed, what can I do to help you come in? I could say, I had a conversation with X the other day who brought up a really good point. So kind of like, how can I pull it in?
Okay. Well, so that's...
But this is when I knew.
One building, right?
Yeah.
But then there is the problem of the signaling itself, right?
Yeah, and the interesting part, I've only experienced this when it's people in the same role as me. And what I practice is one of my friends wrote on Twitter. It's about, I practice being safe, which means that if people make a mistake, I don't make fun of them. I say, oh, that's interesting. Let's look into this and see what we can do about it or what we can learn from it. I model that curiosity I talk about my own mistakes. I talk about when I'm afraid or when I did something that didn't really work. And I think that vulnerability helps create the safe space, because I think it's not enough to just kind of be vulnerable of yourself. If you just only share yourself, it's not enough, but you need to be curious about others as well. And see, oh, that was a really interesting thing you did there. I've never heard about that before. Could you tell me something more? So kind of involving people more. And
that's my second question. Thank you.
Yes, I knew that.
Which is toxic masculinity, right? So you happen to be, as far as I know, a woman.
Yes, as far as I know as well.
And hence you have many other traits of privilege, right? White, hetero, etc., etc., etc. But you are a woman, and we live in a society that has this very fixated ideas about femininity and fixated ideas about women and things like that, and see vulnerability as something that is feminine, right? It's coded feminine. I'm not saying it is, just a common abuse of the society we live, and seeing masculinity as pushes a toxic vision of masculinity that is toxic, that says that women don't have the right that, right? So in your job, when you try to push this, okay, I'm trying to be vulnerable and trying to ask you for a vulnerability, don't you hit a problem with men?
No, but what I find is that often men become vulnerable with me first. So like when I work with teams, for instance, I always have a one-on-one with everyone. Just to kind of build that connection with them, build that relation, so they also know that I'm there to help them and not just to push something down on them. And what I find is that the way I act and the way I speak, and I think maybe that I'm humble, that what I come in with is valuable, but what you have is also valuable. I don't know if that's why, but I very often have men open up to me and become vulnerable. I mean, I had one person who told me about his burn down and his emotions, and he never talked to anyone before. I mean, like no one about emotions, not his girlfriend, not his parents, not his doctor, no one. So I think the fact that I am vulnerable allows people to approach me. And then I also talk to people when I talk about these things, that vulnerable does not mean, you go up and you tell the most private thing about yourself. It's about, what is a small part that's okay for me to share? I like dogs. Or, this weekend I am going hang gliding or something. What is a small thing if I talk about it? Because it's very important for me that people still have their boundaries. And while I think we should, one of my goals in life is to bring humanity back in the workspace. And while I think we can kind of bring the personal part in, it's also okay to have stuff that's private. I'm glad to say I'm straight, but the rest of my sex life is private. Like, that's nobody's business except whoever's involved in it. But I mean, I share big parts of myself. I talk about, like, when I have depressive episodes, for instance, I'm very open about that. And I think somehow the fact that I am so open and that people kind of what they see is what they get, somehow that makes them feel safe to talk to me about it. And that's also what I recommend people when they want to try out something out. I have this awesome courage workshop, which is about exploring your own courage. And one of the advice is find a buddy. Find one person that you trust, where you can practice this, whatever it is you want to be brave in. It can be, speaking up in meetings. It can be, saying no. It can be anything. But find one person where you can practice.
So I would like, I know I'm being sorry about this question. Feel free to cut it. But
you can ask me anything. I will say if I don't want to answer.
It is, you answered when I talked about being vulnerable, and does this pose a problem with creating men to be vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And you said men always open with me, and I kept
not
thinking
always.
about something. Not always, but frequently. Yeah, I kept thinking about something, right? is this the whole thing of emotional labor, right? Is that men are encoded in our society not to open up vulnerability in total, but also encoded to use women as their personal psychologist, basically. And there is a fine line here that I'm trying to touch, and maybe there's no solution in 10 minutes. I understand that.
But I think the toxic masculinity, I think we very often talk about, that is a problem for women, that they can't get in. But I think we damage our boys and men just as much. I mean, not being able to maybe even know your emotions, not to mention talk about them, that is so damaging. And that's why we see, especially young men, being so high on the suicide statistics. I mean, it's the common, for men between 15 and 45, it's the most common cause of death in Germany, Scotland, England, Denmark, Sweden, I know of. I don't know the statistics for other countries. In US, it's only the second one. But still, it's a substantial amount. And I think we are damaging men a lot. And I think that, yes, people open up to me, but sometimes I've had one, for instance, who was like, I didn't mean to. It just came out, and he felt so embarrassed that he shared stuff like that with me. And I think we've been trained so much also to not want to be uncomfortable. And if somebody shares these things with you, you'll probably become uncomfortable. And I feel safe enough that I'm okay with being uncomfortable. Not everyone will, but I think it would be better if we could help talk about emotions, help our boys talk about how they feel instead of just praising them for being able to climb a tree. And I think that is a problem. And I'm very aware of not doing emotional labor that I don't want to. Like, if anyone kind of like, oh, you can be a secretary, you're the woman. I tried that when I was at university. Actually, interesting enough, I never tried it in computer science. But when I studied economics, I tried that kind of like, you don't know anything, you can make coffee and stuff. And here I'm kind of like if somebody says that to me, I mean, I don't mind if we're a group and we take turns in taking notes and stuff. But I will tell them my very blunt opinion about that and where they can put their secretary work.
So that's how you put your limit.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, I mean, for me, I feel like, yes, I'm an agile coach. I'm helping people with agile, even though I find most of what I actually do is help people communicate or collaborate. And I see it as part of what I also like to do, is to create a space where people feel so safe they can be themselves. And I enjoy that. There are other parts of emotional labor that I would not like. If they would come and complain about their girlfriends or whatever, I'll be like, you know what, maybe you should just learn how to behave or whatever. I wouldn't take that in the same way.
We just continue the topic of the week that I was doing with Denise, right? But maybe you have another topic in the last 10 minutes we have that really resonates with you. Do you have one?
I mean, for me, what I'm really thinking about a lot is how we focus so much on technical skills and stuff. And I find that a lot of what really creates a good team, for instance, or a good workplace, is the more personal skills. I don't like calling them soft skills because they're really hard to learn. And I think that stuff like actually listening to each other, like listening to hear what's being said, not to respond. Having that respect for each other. So like creating, right now it feels like an utopia, but creating a place where we respect each other and we accept each other, and not just that, but we also embrace our differences. I mean, so you and I, we are from different continents, we are from different, we're different genders. I have short hair, you have long hair. I mean, even with that, even though we work on software, we have different things and we bring different things, and both are valuable. And if I want to have a not just the IT business, but a world where that is good, but we're curious about, oh, I wonder why, instead of going, why is he doing that? Oh, it must be because he's from Brazil, like you said, you're like, oh, you said something like, I'm from Brazil, which means I come an hour before or an hour later. It doesn't really,
it was self-deprecating humor.
Yeah, which I, by the way, don't like, but that's another part. But if I would go like, I don't want to book a meeting with Romeo because he's always late, instead of saying, oh, that's quite interesting. I find it a little bit fascinating why he's not as restricted as I am sometimes, turning that into a fascination. Like, why am I so restricted by the clock? It's not like I have someone to come home to, so why am I so restricted? Finding that curiosity, and then also accepting that we are different. And that, if you and I were to work together, and just stereotyping it with you being late all the time and me being on time, which is also not true always, you and I would have to talk about it and kind of make an agreement. I like to do personal manuals with people, for instance, like how do you like to work? Do you like to be disturbed? Do you like to have a little bit of time on your own?
Okay, so I see 2 topics here, and we have
yeah, we gotta go through.
So let's go for both. One topic is the usage of creating agreements in order to foster better understanding of each other in relationships. Yes, and another topic is this whole hard skills versus human skills or something like that. Yeah. On the creating agreement, right? I do believe, yes, I am a firm believer that I believe that's one of the things that try to create in my retrospectives and things like that, right? Agreements of, okay, what experiment can we put of something we can try for the next X time to try something like this, right? But when you brought the subject of hard versus soft, what would interest you in that discussion? What would you like an opinion on why?
Yeah, like why do you think we focus so much on hard skills? Is it because it's easier to kind of go check, check, check? Now they know, JavaScript, or is it because we don't value them because they're like natural skills that we have?
I believe that, and that's a very personal belief. I'm not trying to say I'm right, it's just what I believe. Is boils a lot down to toxic masculinity, right? Is we encode mental labor and emotional labor as being less worthy, as being feminine, right, and being less worthy, and as such, then taking them to mean something that is important to our job, but becomes a threat to that, right? Is being less worthy, though. So it's the thing we give to people to do. Right? We create a whole system around having a lot of types of work that are considered lesser in order to pay them more or not pay them at all.
Yeah.
And create a structure of power, right? And that structure of power for me is baked into the fact that baked into those preconceptions. And hence, when we build a society around making this for free and making this invisible, valorizing it becomes hard, and then then having skills in something that is necessary but not valuable to the society, not valorized, right?
Yeah.
Valuable but not valorized becomes a problem, right? And hence, that's still my opinion. We push towards this illusion that we could do without that, and hence we push towards the existence of some skill that is not that, right? Because I do believe that 100% of everything a developer always does, every single every single action a developer does is communication, right?
Yeah.
Writing code is an act of communication. Specifying things is an act of communication, right? There is no hard skill actually in development for me, right? There is some mathematics of algorithms, but most devs don't do that, right? Like it's rare in the industry.
Yeah.
And hence everything else is just communication, just translation. A developer job is basically a glorified translator job. And
you stepped on a lot of toes there, I think.
And then if you accept that, then we are just saying, oh, those soft skills here, we consider them hard, and those soft skills here, we consider them soft. Those communication skills here are considered valuable, those are not.
Yeah.
Right? And you actually need both, and it's just an arbitrary selection to say, we will dominate these people, and those people will dominate. And that then becomes a selection of why does this system like that reach homeostasis? And I do believe personally that they reach homeostasis because the power brokerage works.
For now, until we take over the world.
Yeah, for now.
No, but I mean, I think that I see some movement in this, and I think way too many in our industry have been kind of like, oh, I want to code something awesome. Whereas I think to really provide value, what we need to do is we need to help people solve their problems. I mean, as a developer, if you are coding a music system, it's not because you want to make a fancy algorithm. It's because somebody can listen to that music. And I think kind of framing it differently and looking into that. And I see a lot of places now talking about being more outcome-based than output-based, even though it can be a bit too much. But I think that's a step in that direction, looking into how can we help people, fulfill their needs or give them something to delight them, instead of just how can we give them a cool computer program.
I do believe that it's customary in an industry right now to not really care for the customer. Yes, I also see, for example, in a society like France, that you have a soft, like a skill that is considered soft, but it's considered way higher than development in tech companies, which is selling.
Oh yes.
And then lower than that the tech skills, and lower than that the other soft skills, right?
Yeah.
And I don't see that in every society, but I see that in France a lot. So I do think there is an homeostasis of power for me, yes. And I do believe that, I agree with you, one way of trying to fight it down is by seeing the system as such, is trying to then make work visible and try then to make work needed. And then try, and in order to do that, and that's the hard part for me, right? Making visible seems like a part of a solution for me, but for making the invisible work visible, then there is a work of making that visible, and that work there.
It's the same people.
Yeah. So
but I mean, you and I are very active on Twitter, for instance. We are role models, and we talk about these things. I mean, everyone is a role model, even if only by example. You're leading by example. And no matter what we do, we're role models. And I mean, we have a platform where we can talk about these things. And when we do talk about these things, oh, you're being kicked out. Well, it was nice seeing you again.